There we go. We at the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay acknowledge the First Nations people who are the original inhabitants of the region. The Ho-Chunk Nation and the Menominee Nation are the original first people of Wisconsin, and both nations have ancient historical and spiritual connections to the land that our institution now resides upon. Today, Wisconsin is home to 12 First Nations communities, including the Oneida Nation of Wisconsin, Forest County Potawatomi, Ojibwe Nation communities, Stockbridge-Munsee Band of the Mohicans, and the Brotherton Indian Nation. We acknowledge the First Nations people of Wisconsin. Before we start the panel, I want to thank the CAHSS Associate Dean, Ryan Martin, who is the co-chair of Common Cause, Mandel Waldenberg, assistant to the dean, who is running the Zoom event this afternoon, the Common Cause Planning Committee, and of course, Dean Chuck Ryback for his support of Common Cause. Dean Ryback is also here with us today on the panel. It's been a joy and an honor to collaborate with you all this year. This year, the theme for Common Cause is Beyond Sustainability, Imagining an Ecological Future. This theme is an invitation to think about how we might benefit from a more robust framework than environmental sustainability to address the interrelated environmental and social crises that we now face. You can read a full description of the theme on the CAHSS website. To really boil the theme down and into just a couple of sentences, I'll say that we're working with the idea that sustainability is a harmful mirage if we think we're going to be able to use technical means to simply sustain business as usual. Moreover, and just as importantly, we cannot successfully address the problems of environmental sustainability without simultaneously addressing social justice. So we have plenty of problems to work with here. Having said that, I'd like to invite our panelists to each introduce themselves.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Thomas Campbell. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Theater and Dance here at UW Green Bay.
I'm Elise Cohen, associate professor of political science in the Public and Environmental Affairs Unit.
I'm Chuck Ryback. I am the Dean of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences, and I'm also an English professor and creative writer.
Hi, my name is Lois Stevens, and I'm an associate professor in First Nation Studies and First Nations Education doctoral program.
Hello, I'm Georgina Wilson-Denges, and I am the chair and a professor of psychology.
Okay, I think we got everybody. The panelists will each have a chance to speak, and then we'll have about 15 minutes for Q&A and discussion. So please feel free to use the chat to share comments and questions with everyone, or the Q&A to submit questions for the panelists to address. Thanks for sharing your thoughts with us along the way.
Hi, everybody. I get to have the pleasure of being first, one of the first speaker of this panel. I want to preface what I'm saying by saying that I as a member of the Department of Theater and Dance, I do theater. I am not a scholar of environmental issues or climate change or sustainability, but I am certainly a member of the human race, and so the issues, regardless of our access to scholarship on those subjects, I do have a strong investment in this as a topic, and I think as an industry, the theater world is very cognizant the issues of sustainability and trying to figure out how we're going to maneuver through that. I think theater is often positioned in spectacle. Which means that we have a lot of fancy sets and a lot of fancy costumes, and it's very sometimes more often than we would care to admit, materialistic. And those materials are often very expensive and consuming. So as an industry, we're having very strong conversations about sustainability and what we can do to decrease our carbon footprint as an industry, but also how we can internalize sustainable practices within our theaters and within our programs. One of the things that I was really struck with as I navigated through the programming of the Common Cause Beyond Sustainability is how deeply personal these issues are. And that's something that came up in discussion after discussion and presentation after presentation is the personal investment and the personal effect that sustainability issues have on the presenters and the people that they're presenting on, or the topics that they're presenting on. And it's this issue of personability that I kind of want to focus on. I think, at least for me personally, when I think about sustainability, I think globally, I think environmentally, I think climate change. But navigating through all of these presentations, I'm hit with how these things actually affect us personally, how they affect us psychologically, emotionally, mentally, and the steps and the measures that we take to move forward as communities, as cultures, as industries, as individual disciplines. We also need to navigate how these are affecting the people within us. So the question, if we're thinking beyond sustainability, I think, and I would hope and I would challenge all of us to be cognizant of and privilege individual impacts of this, how we are navigating through and sustaining business practices. If we're thinking about sustainability, are we looking at individual networks and how what within our businesses are sustainable to make our workers healthy, make our colleagues more mentally secure, that we're keeping mental health and mental wellness as a part of our sustainability practices. And I think that's something that is something that is really it's something that I want to focus on, and something that I think is important as I move forward to reframe my thinking about sustainability into the more personal, introspective manner. As an industry, we are having these conversations about where to move forward and how we're going to do that. There are definitely impacts over the past year on the theater community. And as we open up theaters, conversations are happening as to why don't we take the opportunity to implement new practices, better practices that are more environmentally friendly, as well as more friendly to the people who are producing our shows, cast members, crew members, producers, technicians, volunteers even. And so it's a very reflective time, and hopefully it will garner some necessary conversations to shift the paradigm of how we do things in our industry. And I hope that people take the opportunity to shift the paradigm in other industries as well. So I'm going to wrap up with that, and I will pass it on to the next presenter.
Okay, thanks so much, Tom. That was really great to start us. And I'm just going to share a couple of slides to talk through some things. It was really wonderful to see all of the Common Cause presentations and think back after it had been a couple of months to reflect on what some threads were that sort of interlinked all of them together. And this is what I've come up with. I think one of the first takeaways I have for the Beyond Sustainability theme in terms of what I gained from the topics was that racial justice is part of environmental justice. This was really highlighted in Liz's talk, as well as the No Justice, No Sustainability panel that we had in the past year. And I think we see this in the current events. We have to grapple with the disproportionate impact on marginalized groups that a lot of environmental harm affects, whether it's pollution or the poisoning, the toxic effects of how we are living on planet Earth. Certain groups are bearing the brunt of that more than others. And we can't really move forward with addressing environmental sustainability or ecological sustainability without taking into account how racial justice and inequity intervenes in that. The second thing that I took away, which might not have been at the foreground, but it was something I sort of noticed, was the trajectory of history. So the effects of colonial legacies in the way that we think in our mindset, that we can extract resources for the accumulation of wealth. And it's without regard to the populations that may be suffering as a result. And that is something that has been path dependent from hundreds of years of this way of thinking. And I think it's something that we need to grapple with even today. So the interspecies lens is another one that I think was really present, emerging across all of the talks, or at least most of them, that we really need to think about the interconnection that we have in ecosystems, rather than this sort of human-centric approach where we are thinking about the effects on just human beings, also thinking how we are living with other types of environmental factors and species, animal life. Allison's presentation really brought that to the spotlight, and we could see it in the eco-poetics event as well. I think this is one that, as it came up across the talks, it can be hard to acknowledge how we are living with animal life, but the pandemic really puts that front and center, because of course the spread of these kinds of pandemics like coronavirus have at their origins a human and animal relations. So we need to think sort of beyond just the environment in terms of justice. We need to think about race and marginalized groups and disproportionate impacts. We need to think about the broader historical trajectory, and then we need to think beyond the sort of human-centric approach. So my concluding thoughts when I was reflecting on all of those events is that what we need to do is question what is failing us, and that was raised in Chris's Eco-Poetics event as well. What do we need to leave behind in order to really go beyond sustainability and beyond our current failures? And clearly the human-centric approach is one of those, but I would bring in a little bit of global politics as well to say that we can see a lot of failures in the way we've organized our strategy based on national sovereign interests, what we call a state-centric approach in global politics. This doesn't appear to be serving us well, because whether it is a pandemic or deforestation or racial justice, these different interwoven sustainability issues cross national borders. So we might want to have more of a conversation putting at the center the idea of moving towards a planetary mindset rather than dividing ourselves up according to sovereign border lines. We're probably quite far from that, but it might do us good to at least start imagining other possibilities that think of us as inhabiting one planet together. So I will end there and turn it over to the next speaker. Thank you so much for listening.
Hi, everyone. This is Chuck Ryback. As I said earlier, I just want to start by thanking everyone who participated in this, especially my collaborator in the Dean's office, Ryan Martin, and also David Velker. I can say that during this year, well, year meaning feels like a century, that Common Cause and the events and participating in them, just taking them in, has brought me real joy at a time when I really needed it. So I appreciate that very much. So I come to this as a part organizer of the event, and it's got me reflecting, frankly, on, as an administrator, what the institutional role is in the themes that we've been talking about. So before I get into that, I've been spending a lot of time thinking about and studying music lately as just kind of a way to rewire my brain. And it's striking to me as always that David opens all the events with the land acknowledgement. And so, if you know John Coltrane's album, A Love Supreme, which is his sort of really famous kind of masterwork, the opening song on that album is called Acknowledgement. And it's just a way that I remind myself that acknowledgement is the beginning of something. It is not a contained thing that ends once that acknowledgement is over. And the remaining tracks on that album, On a Love Supreme, the second one is Resolution, the third is Pursuance, and the fourth is Psalm, P-S-A-L-M. And that's really got me thinking about institutionally, personally, where do we go from here? So after an acknowledgement of all the things that we've talked about during Common Cause that have been talked about, what is it that we resolve to do? And beyond that resolution, what is the pursuance of that? How are we going to chase that down? And at the end, whether it's something we've accomplished or a conclusion, what is the story or the song that would take the form of a psalm that we could talk about? And one of the real sort of lights during this whole event has been reading Sarah Jaquette Ray's A Field Guide to Climate Anxiety. And it's helped me focus on it. One of the things I love about her work is the focus on her students. And she identifies her students as young people, as a different generation than her. And, that's largely true at GB, but not universally, at least for my students. And it's just sort of orienting me in thinking about what is our responsibility to our students and to our community as an institution if they care very deeply about the things that have been talked about in this, in this series of talks and events. We have a responsibility to them and to the community to deliver them knowledge about things that they care about and are invested in. So I've been thinking a lot about that. And, I find that sometimes as an institution, we think as if we are an individual rather than as an institution, and we're not. We're not an individual, and we need to start thinking of ourselves as an institution that has influence over other institutions and connections to relationships with other institutions. And so if our mission is to both create and to deliver knowledge, our institution has a responsibility to do that. And it might seem obvious in saying that, but if we're making an acknowledgement that we're facing significant problems, then the statements that we make, that responsibility takes on equal significance. And it's kind of a long way of me saying that we cannot, as an institution, fear giving offense or suffering repercussions for beliefs that are firmly anchored in and confirmed by research and fact. That we have to be the stewards of that knowledge, create knowledge, disseminate knowledge. And I don't think we can do it in a way that we're just saying, well, we'll lead by example and others will follow. I think leading by example is a great thing when you're talking about individuals, and institutions can certainly do that. But we have to be more than that. And the question that I would have is, what do our students expect from us in that way? We shouldn't, and this has been brought up many times, we shouldn't fool ourselves into thinking that there's not denial and opposition to much of the subject matter that we explored in Common Cause this year, which is why the topic is so great, right? We want something provocative, and because we want provocative results in what we're pursuing. But I would encourage us as an institution to explore what's next. And we can't pretend that we can make progress without explicitly naming sometimes and confronting what is in opposition to the goals that we have for sustainability, for beyond sustainability, for eco-justice, preservation, and on and on. So if I loop back to A Love Supreme, I really have enjoyed and taken great joy in Common Cause this year as an acknowledgement. So what I'm thinking next is, what is it that we resolve to do? What comes after this, and how do we pursue it? And, in what ways can we, for the sake of our students, for our communities and what they expect of us, pursue those things in a way that once we reach some kind of goal, that we have the psalm or the song that we want to sing about that journey and the change that was made along the way. So thanks. I will turn it over to the next presenter.
Thank you guys for introducing this topic today. And I'm going to be honest, before today, I really wasn't sure what I was going to talk about, mainly because there's so much that we can talk about when we talk about sustainability and the current climate that we're in. But the one thing that kept coming back to me when thinking about the issues that we're currently facing is this book called Red Alert by Dan Wildcat. And in this book, he talks about 4 removals that Indigenous people have faced. So I just want to go through those really quick. And the first removal was a physical removal where Indigenous people were pushed from their lands or removed through various genocidal acts. The second removal came during the boarding school era, when Indigenous children were taken from their homes and forced into boarding schools, and their identities, the cultural identities were taken, their language was taken, their clothes were taken, and even their hair was taken. So every aspect of Indigenous they tried to strip that from the children. And the third removal was through the education system, when basically Indigenous history is all but removed from mainstream educational curriculum. So you don't see a whole lot of Indigenous history growing up in K through 12. And then various societal stereotypes painting Indigenous people as in a certain picture that we are not. So the fourth removal, and what I really want to talk about today, is a removal due to climate burning activities, what Dr. Wildcat called climate burning activities, are what we generally refer to as climate change. So when he talks about this fourth removal, he stresses that it is not just Indigenous people that are experiencing this removal. Our entire population, world population, are experiencing this removal currently. And we need to not only recognize that as Indigenous people, but as people in general, that we are all facing this battle together. And then, this book was written before the pandemic, of course, but given the pandemic and the various struggles that it has shown, or that is given to us, and also the social climate that we are currently experiencing, we're realizing more and more that it is not just an Indigenous issue. It is not just a Black issue. It is not just a white issue. It's not a race issue, but it is a people issue. It is something that we are all facing and that we all need to address within ourselves. So, I can say that, of course, people of color are experiencing climate change and the pandemic and social justice at a much higher level, and that needs to be addressed, of course. So today, I think what we need to talk about is just a shift in how we address issues, and what Dr. Wildcat calls a cultural climate shift, a change in the way of thinking and the actions that we take. So one of the first things that we need to understand is, we were raised in this economic society where we are judged and we are looked at for what we have and for the power that we hold, the positions that we hold. And often the environment gets put on the back burner when we're trying to achieve these different things. We're not thinking about how our actions are affecting the planet. So that being said, you know, we have to look within ourselves. And one of the things that, you know, I like to call for my students to do is to understand that we as humans, we do not have any power on this planet. We don't have that power that we think that we have. What we do have is responsibility. So in the vast, you know, concept of time, we are but this little blips. But what we do here is affecting the planet. And we need to understand that we have that responsibility to take care of the planet and to live in reciprocity with that planet. So what we are giving to her is what we're going to receive. So what we're not right now, what we're giving to her is destruction in various forms. So that's what we're going to receive. And it's a very, I don't want it to sound very bleak, you know, when we talk about climate change and we talk about different social and ecological issues, it's all very bleak. But what I don't want to end my message on something negative or bleak. I want to end it with hope. So in that hope, we can see a brighter future. And I'm not trying to, you know, say that it's so easy that if we just change our actions every day that the planet's going to heal itself and everybody's going to be happy. You know, that's not realistic, and I understand that. But what I'm saying is every day, if we live with more intention, with more gratitude as individuals, that will affect the planet and very slowly, because we're not only addressing how we treat the planet, but we're addressing how we treat each other. So I'm hoping that this message reaches you guys in a kind manner, just to acknowledge that it's not going to be a huge environmental project, a new technology or something along those lines that's going to save this planet. It's within each one of us and how we treat each other and how we treat the planet, and recognizing that responsibility we have here on Mother Earth. So that's all I have. So I'll let Georgina finish this off. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much to all of the panelists. I've been furiously writing things down as everyone is speaking. I also wanted to share some gratitude to both David Velker and Ryan Martin for an entire year of really intellectual study and also kind of soul searching about the term sustainability and beyond sustainability, and why do we perhaps need to move beyond a term of sustainability. And I've been thinking a lot about that. As an environmental psychologist, I think a lot about what Tom was talking about the mental health of our species on this planet. And I'm not convinced that we need to pitch the word sustainability. I think that we need to look at it in a different way. When I hear people talk about sustainability, I hear them talking about how we as humans need to be doing something more sustainable. But what I really love is thinking about how our planet sustains us. And so I looked up the definition of sustainability just to get some perspective on the language itself. And one of the definitions is that to sustain is to strengthen or support physically and mentally. And I love the thought that our planet actually does that for us. And we are not separate from the planet. We are not doing something to be better at sustainability. We are part of this ecosystem, and the planet is sustaining us. Another definition is to sustain is to support the weight of. And I love that term. I love thinking about how we as humans in this ecosystem are weighted, and how the earth is supporting us and supporting our weight. And I think the message for me as a psychologist is that we need to acknowledge and to show gratitude and develop a love for our planet's ability to sustain us, and to share that message amongst ourselves, but also with the next generations. We call this term in my field biophilia, the love of life. And I think that if we can develop a way to love the planet in a very emotional way, that it can help us consider our behavior and consider ways in which we can live our lives in a more holistic manner with nature, rather than thinking about, oh, I need to change this or I need to change that about myself. I want to consider myself as part of the ecosystem. It looks like I'm in the midst of a forest. I like to consider humans in the context of our planet and in the context of nature. And if we can develop a true biophilia, a true love of how our planet sustains us, both physically, but also importantly, mentally, then it can help us confront some of the challenges that we're going through right now. Thinking about what Elise brought up about racial injustice, and also some of the stressors of climate change, the Earth actually provides for us some mental healing in the midst of what we're going through. And I think the pandemic has been such a great example. People have been going outside and walking in nature and enjoying nature in a way that they have not before, and discovering the amazing healing power of our planet. And that is my message of hope, that if we develop a more emotionally attached love, biophilia of nature, that we can then allow nature to help us heal ourselves, and then pay that gratitude forward to help us heal our planet, and to be able to sustain, to be able to support the weight of all of us on this planet, and to strengthen and support each other and the world that we live in. So that was my message. And I just wanted to say how grateful I am to the wisdom of all of our panelists today, but also the presenters of Common Cause throughout the year. Thank you.
Wow, thank you everybody for sharing those thoughts and getting our conversation started here. I took a lot of notes myself and have lots of ideas kind of rushing through my head. I realized it's been way too long since I've listened to A Love Supreme, but I can hear it and feel it. It's probably been years. I'll do that later today. And I'm excited to check out Dan Wildcat's book, Red Alert. So thanks for sharing that, Lois. I really appreciate comments that all of you made in various ways. And it's interesting to see how they might fit together. You know, this idea, one underlying theme, I think, is a kind of holistic view. So maybe, you know, considering the personal aspects of sustainability, Thomas spoke to that. If we think about a a view of the world where we're not simply fractured into sovereign nation states that are, fighting for the remaining scraps. How can we collaborate together, a more holistic view of global society? It's really interesting to think about, areas in which that might work and areas in which our smaller scale decision-making processes are more effective. But it does, I'm intrigued by that idea, of course, of a different kind of balance there in terms of global versus national interests. Georgina, I really appreciated how you kind of flipped the idea of sustainability. One of the writers I spoke about back in November, Robin Wall Kimmerer, talks about all flourishing is mutual. And I think that if we can fully recognize how the earth sustains us humans, sure, and all the other living beings on the planet, and then how much we need each other, all these different beings, whether we're talking about humans or plants or animals. And we tend to think about like, oh, sure, we need to have plants and animals, we use those for food. But you spoke also to the ways that we derive our mental or psychological or maybe even spiritual sustenance from our engagement with the natural world, with those other beings. So I like that idea of salvaging sustainability by changing the terms of it. I certainly never thought that with Beyond Sustainability as a theme that we would entirely jettison the language, but it does seem like something that's ripe for reconsideration, and really appreciate the way you all have engaged here. There does seem to be a difficulty here that Chuck spoke to. He was talking about, we have to take the responsibility to share knowledge, to be stewards of knowledge, even to create new knowledge, and that almost by definition, some of that knowledge will not be welcomed by the larger community. I mean, sometimes we even have conflicts inside the institution of the university in terms of how we might prioritize things and so forth. And so there is a kind of, there's an ongoing debate, even sometimes conflict over not just ideas, but values. And, sometimes in the academy, we have focused more on knowledge as a kind of neutral thing, as opposed to some of the underlying values. And, I heard Chuck calling us to be courageous to speak to both of those things, the way that knowledge can emerge from and in conjunction with value commitments. So if we want to talk about social justice, for example, that's a value that we can really integrate with everything that we do. If we want to try to engage in the world in a way to bring forward racial justice, to work to mitigate the harms of colonization, and to heal all the wounds of separation. Now that's an awful lot for academics and academic institution to take on. But if we get back to that holistic perspective, as individuals, I think Lois really spoke to this, the way we behave. One person isn't going to be able to stop climate change, but the way we interact with each other as human beings, and the way we treat all those other beings, plants and animals, if we think of the planetary being, like all of that does have an impact. I'm hoping there's some questions out there. I didn't mean to hold forth for too long there. So anybody on the panel or in our audience like to share any questions or just other thoughts we can chat a little bit more about? Or maybe that some of the panelists, you know, you might want to respond to each other in some ways, as I just did, responding to some, you know, to some of your comments. Anybody would like to jump in, feel free to just unmute and go for it.
David, I'll say one thing to picking up on Georgina's definition of sustain, and just trying to go back to my pet example of music for a minute. And John Coltrane is, you know, thinking about the applicability of the definition of sustain as applied to a sound or a note, that it would exist and carry on forward beyond the action of the person who produces it, right? And to me, that's sort of a, you know, a useful guide or concept here. And even thinking about what we can do as individuals, that referring to Ray's book again, you know, like where she talks about you can just become overwhelmed and not see any individual thing that you do making a difference, and the despair that might come with that. But there's something in that definition of sustain that I think is hopeful, that you can do something that on the individual level, but also at the institutional level, that will reverberate and exist beyond the time of your taking that action or making that statement. So I find that particular definition of sustain and sustainability, and I don't know, inspiring. Since people talked about hope, I find that hopeful.
Thank you, Chuck. We do have a question in the Q&A, so I'm going to read that. How, as students, can we take our short time at the university to help this constant sustainability issue that we have? Would it be classes or groups to join, or what would you all suggest? So great question about how to get involved in addressing these issues. I'm going to put that out there for the panel. And maybe I'll go ahead and read a second question. It seems kind of similar, but what area would you recommend that we start at? Minority communities, national, global. So there's questions here about, like, okay, panel of academics, you've got all these wonderful ideas, but where do we actually start to do this kind of work?
And I think it goes back to individual and something that Lois said, that we have no power, but we have great responsibility. And I think responsibility is a very individual thing that you can start with. You can acknowledge your own responsibility and then decide what is authentic to you as an action to raise yourself up to that responsibility. And I think that to me is a great place to start. It necessitates doing some research and finding out what's going on. And then it also necessitates some soul searching and discovering what your role is, what your responsibility is, and how can you authentically act to make an impact.
And I can address the question about the levels as well. If we think of the global level, so maybe people that are listening, tuning in today are aware that today we are having the Global Climate Summit with the Biden administration and close to 30 countries in the world. So I think something else people can relate to on that level is there's so much in the news about migration and arrivals at the southern border. Well, many of them are fleeing the dry corridor of Central America, where there's been devastating drought and effects of climate change that have made that part of Central America uninhabitable. And then Americans are very much preoccupied with the arrival of those people. So it's something that if we only think about what's happening locally, then we'll miss how our own local reality is shaped by a broader global context.
I can address some questions as well. You know, like Georgina and David have both talked about, is looking at our responsibility on that personal level. So it's easy to start with ourselves, because in the vast majority of everything, it's so hard to control everything around us. It's impossible to control everything around us. And then, just like Elise is saying, we're so often preoccupied with what's in front of us. And, you know, we're always chasing the instant gratitude, you know, or the instant satisfaction. So what we can get to make us happy right now. And that's what is really most damaging to our planet, because we're always chasing that. So, you know, for just you as a person, you can start on the campus by, you know, keeping the campus clean, you know, looking at those small things, trash on the floor, you know, just those little small things that we can control right in front of us is a very good start. As far as groups, I just started in fall, so I haven't even been able to experience UWGB campus fully because it's been closed for the most part. So I can't give any knowledge on that yet. But I will say that the First Nations department on campus is very opening to anybody that has questions, to anybody that is interested. The center is always open to questions. We're not currently open every day. It's Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I believe. But, you know, email us, call us, you know, let us know how we can help. You can always take First Nations courses, you know, just a little free advertisement for my department. But we offer awesome courses where we talk about these issues. We talk about land, we talk about the 4 R's in Indigenous education, and that being respect, responsibility, relationship, and reciprocity. I'm always testing myself with those. But we're always talking about how we can address those things in different steps of our life. But, you know, just to look at your questions, and the same answer that you've already been given by multiple others is you start with yourself and how you affect the planet. And that could be as easy as, what are those called? Meatless Mondays or something, where you don't eat any meat on Monday. You know, starting very small with something like that, because the meat industry is very devastating to our planet. If we lower our consumption of meat, we will slowly be helping our planet. So that's just something small that we can start with. But there's so many other different tips that we could go down that rabbit hole. But I hope that those small answers help you. Another option for especially social justice is signing petitions, writing letters, sending emails to these positions of power. Just to the vast majority of letters going to them aren't being read fully, and that's just the truth. But the fact is that they're getting them constantly, and they have to address it. So that's another thing that can be done. And I hope that's helpful.
I would also like to address the acknowledge that you are here right now listening to this. You know, take, you know, use that as an example of the things that you are doing. You know, what, you know, give yourself some credit for the things that you do on a regular basis. You know, acknowledge that, you know, maybe you walk to class on a nice day instead of driving. Maybe you skip buying a cup of coffee and you take your own. You know, little things like that just decrease the carbon footprint just a little bit every day. Those do add up after a while, and so give yourselves credit for the little things that you do, and then maybe share those tips with the people that are closest to you. you know, and just build that network out of taking those small steps in the right direction. Sometimes that's all we can control. I get overwhelmed by the big picture global stuff. So like, if I can do this little thing, I'm going to do it. And if I can get, you know, my family to do it too, great, you know, and hopefully it just goes from there.
One thing that I noticed in these various comments, you know, thinking about what Elise had to say of, well, we really need to look at this larger, the larger context, our global context, and then a number of you have spoken to, you know, starting in a much more personal way. I'm thinking about actually what Sarah Ray shared with us, and again, that field guide to climate anxiety. I mean, there is a sense or a need to be grounded, you know, with yourself, like to find some ground, so you can be present to yourself and to the people around you, so that you can experience that biophilia, and then that can be a place from which to learn about, you know, how other people are being affected by the degradation of the planet, by the disruption of the climate, and so forth. So I think there's a, you know, there's a balance to be struck there, and we're probably always going to be leaning a little more one way than the other, and having to find that, find and refine a kind of balance there. One thing that I know has been really helpful for me is to really get to know the place where I live, in terms of, again, all the other beings who live here with me, whether they are the trees in my yard, this place that I have stewardship over, and happen to own a title to in our legal system. But I do feel a responsibility to, you know, take good care of those trees, or to learn about all the other plants and animals in the area. So I know when I was a kid growing up, there were probably like 3 kinds of birds on my radar, right? I mean, you know, I knew what a robin was, a cardinal, a blue jay. That was probably about it, maybe a crow. And it's such a pleasure to get to learn other birds, who live here in my neighborhood with me, and to see when they come back after the winter. And then, and why is that important? Well, it isn't just, well, it's important because they are my neighbors, and I can think about, well, I want to be careful about how I'm behaving to make sure I'm not doing things that endanger them. So I have a bunch of windows in my house. I have to have stickers on the windows to protect the birds, so the birds see the window and don't crash into it. We have an owl that lives in a kind of ravine behind my yard. I want to make sure I'm not putting out some kind of poisons that are going to get into the food web and end up killing the raptors and the owls in the neighborhood, and encourage my neighbors to think about that as well, which I've had an opportunity to do this spring. So when I talk about, you know, getting grounded, I'm really thinking about getting to know and love the place where I live, and then from there being able to look out and survey and think about other actions I can take in the world. So I encourage you all to think about that. And here again, just speaking to the students who are with us. Yeah, Elise, go ahead, and we'll probably close on your comment. Go ahead.
Just a quick follow-up on the individual and the global. I see them as mutually reinforcing. At the individual level, what you can do to start thinking in that global context is just reading global news outlets, or a news outlet with global stories, reading literature or poetry, or watching films with perspectives in other regions, countries. And then it becomes part of you and your own daily living, and attending to the blue jays in your yard. You may also be thinking about, you know, the Iraqi or the person in Ecuador, and how their lived experience is different or similar to yours. So for me, they're really bound up together.
Thanks, Elise. So as we wrap up here, first I want to thank everybody who joined us today, all the guests and anybody who might be listening to this later. And of course, to thank our panelists, certainly a lot for us to think about. And we have a special guest here as we conclude. The CAHSS Associate Dean, Ryan Martin, is here. Again, Ryan worked with me all year long to organize the Common Cause events. So I'm excited he's here with us as we wrap up the Common Cause 2020. Hey there, Ryan.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. And now is my moment to get to express my own gratitude toward first the panel today. I really am very, very thankful to the speakers. I have learned a ton today, and it's given me a lot to think about. So thank you for that. I want to take a moment I have two things I want to do. One is to thank some people, but then also to talk a little bit about next year's Common Cause. And so I want to thank Dr. David Belker. What an extraordinary job he has done of curating a wonderful speaker series, also a wonderful conference back in December. So David, thank you so much for all of your work. And I also wanted to alert people to the fact that we have a couple of podcast episodes. In fact, one of them dropped today where David talks about his journey through the environmental humanities, the works that have inspired him, and so forth. So take a look at that. You can find it at causeeffect.org, and it's available. It's Cannonball is the name of the show, and particularly fascinating episodes with David. Thank you very much to the rest of the Common Cause Planning Committee. There are too many people to name, but it's really been an extraordinary committee. And I do want to shout out to Amanda, who is running things right now, who has been just extraordinary beyond belief in coordinating and organizing all of these events. She's had to essentially learn a whole another job this year on top of the very, very difficult job she already had. So thank you, Amanda, for everything you do. Thanks, Chuck Ryback, for your support of Common Cause, not just support of the idea and not just the financial support backing it, but your attendance and involvement in every event, including today's, where you served as a panelist. So it was wonderful to get your thoughts on things as we wrapped up here. So finally, just final with regard to thanks, thank you to all the presenters, including the panelists today, the monthly speakers, the panelists over the course of the year, the students and faculty who presented at our virtual conference in December of 20. I have learned quite a bit from you, and I very much appreciate you taking the time to do the work you've done. But I want to take a moment to talk about next year's Common Cause. And so as thankful as I am for these efforts, we are going to continue this initiative next year. And I want to talk a little bit about the planning we've done there. The planning committee considered a number of different options when it comes to themes for next year. And one of them felt particularly timely. So I want to quickly read you an abridged description of our theme for next year. The public's ability to distinguish truth from falsehood seems to have deteriorated significantly in recent years. There's widespread deficit in the ability to recognize subject expertise, critically evaluate sources, and synthesize ideas. This deficit has proven catastrophic during the COVID-19 health crisis, where conspiracy theories have carried more weight for some than the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. Common Cause 21-22 will explore the role of the modern university in supporting the continual and fearless sifting and winnowing by which alone the truth can be found, which has been part of the University of Wisconsin identity for over a century. In an era where information, both true and false, can be readily accessed from our phones, the function of higher education institutions must include not only generating and sharing high-quality information, but also teaching the critical information literacy skills required to navigate a complex terrain. Such skills are essential to democracy and to making progress on the issues of our time, including human rights, racial justice, and sustainability. Our 21-22 Common Cause theme will be truth, information, misinformation, and democracy. And with that, I want to thank everybody for tuning in today and for participating. I want to thank our panelists again, and we will share a lot more information about that theme and how you